teachings, the writings of Peace Pilgrim, to working for an extended period with a different teacher, thought we'd take advantage of the transition time to talk about some of the points that we emphasize in the way that we teach here, in particular in the way that I have understood the path in my own experience, in my own journey. Of all of the concepts that have been conveyed to me over the 25 years that I've been formally practicing, the most important, the most powerful in the beginning, the most powerful in the middle, and the most powerful in the end is something called friendship. Naturally, when we say it, we say the word friendship, and it is a concept, but it's a very useful concept because it leads us to the direct experience of friendship. And we discover as the years pass, as we're training in many different, some of which we select and some of which select us, we discover the depth and the various facets of friendship. Now, if we think about facets, we might think of a jewel. And when you look at a jewel, you'll see different sides, different ways that the different sides reflect. And one of the nice things about the metaphor of facets of a jewel is that different facets point in opposite directions. And in the case of a jewel, if I say, here is a jewel, and there are different facets, and some of them point in different directions, and you might think, well, that's obviously true. Of course that's the case. Why do you even bring it up? But if we talk about the jewel of friendship, say different parts of friendship push us in opposite directions, that might seem a bit more convenient. So it's worth considering that carefully. For example, the example I'd like to emphasize today is that one part of friendship is giving a person support and making sure that they feel comforted and safe and affirmed. A person should be able to come to us and feel accepted, that we're not judging them and putting them down, constantly trying to figure out why they're wrong, how we can correct them so that they'll be more the way we think people should be. I know with my oldest friend, one of the nicest things is that we can get together. I can tell him that I'm doing something, and he accepts that. Says, oh yeah, right, of course. And even if I'm telling him I'm doing something that's really stupid, he'll say, yeah, you know, that's how it goes. Sometimes you do stupid things. You know, I did some stupid stuff, and I learned a lot from it, similar to what you're going through right now. So keep it up. Doing fine. And that feels really good. That's very helpful. And the same with him. Just recently, he's doing something that was obviously going to lead to disaster, and I knew that, and I didn't think it was important to tell him because, you know, he's good. He knows what he's doing. If he has to go through a disaster, then that's fine. He's a strong person who can handle that. So I just said, yeah, you know, go for it. Do what you're going to do. And then naturally the weeks passed, and it naturally became time to discuss the fact that this path wasn't going to work for him. In the same way that when it's appropriate, he would then see that I was interested in having that conversation about why what I was doing was obviously stupid. I say, yeah, make a change. Sounds like you're ready to make a change. But in any case, it's very affirming. It's important, of course, that there's a sense of safety. It may seem strange to even bring it up in a talk on friendship, but I think it's important that we start at the bottom. So the bottom is that in the case of good friendship, you are at the very least always objectively and completely physically safe. That's, of course, it may seem strange to even say, but I think it's important to say. There's never a time when a friend would make one of their friends. That would be absurd. In any kind of friendship, whether that's just an acquaintance, someone we don't know very well, someone we're very close to, a romantic or family relationship, all of these are different kinds of friendship. There's friendship involved in all of those. And in no case would we ever actually hurt someone. We would always be objectively safe. Now that's, of course, the very bottom. It's the very lowest standard. But nonetheless have to take very seriously, and we have to hold ourselves to that and be sure to that regarding our own objective physical. So we want to be sure that as we relate to people, as we engage with them, that under absolutely no circumstances is anyone being hurt or put in any unsafe situation. This is something that if we notice that any slight exceptions are being made to this, then that needs to immediately receive a great deal of attention. And often it's important for other people to be involved, because there's never in a friendship. However, even more than that, we want, as the friendship proceeds, whatever kind of friendship it is, we would like to actually feel more and more safe, more and more comfortable in our bodies. We want to feel even more confident in our physical experience. So that the friendship allows us to sink into, settle into our bodies in a way that make us feel healthy and magnificent. So that's the case of our objective physical experience. It's also the case subjectively in terms of our emotional experience. We would never never want a situation where someone is making us feel unsafe. Of course, that may happen, but again, it needs to receive a great deal of attention and to feel emotionally safe and secure. But even more, as time passes, we want to feel more and more emotionally confident, more and more able to settle in a way that is comfortable into our emotional experience. So these two standards, at the very least, we're safe physically and emotionally, and ideally we're increasingly confident and secure physically and emotionally as the friendship proceeds. These are very important points. And all of this fits into the side of friendship that is comforting, that is supportive. Just yesterday, I was at a spiritual ceremony, and the leader of it, near the end of it, gave thanks for the various teachers that he has had, he thanked those teachers who had given him such support, who had helped him to feel more comfortable. But then he did what I think many of us do, as we see how the jewel has facets that point in different directions. And he then thanked those teachers he'd had who kicked him around, who pushed him further than he wanted to go, who forced him to see that things are not the way he sees them, that the way he sees things is inaccurate, and wouldn't affirm his own deception of himself and others, wouldn't affirm the actions that he was taking that were hurting himself and others. Again, in my own experience, teachers I've had who have helped me have consistently been people who were not willing to encourage me to do what is wrong. When I was seeing things in an inaccurate way, they would not say, yes, you're right. On the contrary, they would ask me to see things in a new way. One example of this in the other direction is that I had another friend, another one of my oldest friends, who was doing something that was not making her happy, was not making the best use of her skills for the world, and that she didn't want to do, but she felt like she had to do it. And one day I told her, you, of course, are living your own life, and you can choose to do this thing again, to take this kind of job again. It was a certain profession that she was doing, and I said, you can choose to continue with that if you want, but I just want to let you know that if you do, I won't support you. I won't help you to do it. And if you come to me with the suffering that you're having now because you're doing this, I won't help you with that. I won't listen to you. I won't sympathize. You're on your own. Because I know that this is the wrong thing for you to do, and you know that this is the wrong thing for you to do. Now you're free to do it, but I won't support you. And she said, not at the moment, but within a week, within a few weeks, certainly within a few weeks, and has continued to say until this very day, that that was one of the greatest acts of friendship she'd ever experienced. Because everyone else sort of said, well, yeah, I mean, you know, like sort of, I mean, hey. That isn't friendship. That's abandoning someone, actually. Even though it may seem as if I was abandoning her. In fact, that isn't the way it was experienced either by me or by her. The Buddha, when he taught, he gave a number of qualities, several qualities by which one should judge whether someone is a good friend to us. Are, you know, very obvious. When you need help, they give you help, things like that. But one of them was actually, was to me, when I first read it many, many years ago, quite shocking. It was, the way you know that someone is a good friend is that when you're doing something that is unethical, that is wrong, that is delusional, that's hateful, that's greedy, that has unwholesome qualities, they will confront you on that. And they will argue with you. And they will do whatever they can to stop you from doing what you want to do. Now that was actually quite surprising to me. That a person, that's how, if someone doesn't do that, someone never confronts you and tells you to stop behaving in the way you're behaving, then you know that they're not a good friend. Well, that was actually, that really struck me the day I read it. I still remember the couch that I was sitting on. Because it was such a mind-blowing moment for me, seeing that it's true. It completely resonated with me, that's true. A person who would be unwilling to ask me to grow doesn't have my own best interest in mind. They have their own comfort in mind. They want to feel comfortable. They're not interested in my well-being. And it's true, then I couldn't trust them. Because they are a kind of a, isn't there the word yes man? Don't we have that word? I think it's usually used in politics. But we're all politicians, let's face it. And so we don't want people like that. We don't want people who are just going to say yes. We want people who are often going to tell us no. What you're doing isn't considerate and isn't reasonable accurately. So this side, the side of friendship that is also very important. I remember in high school, one of my close friends in high school, the first time this had ever happened to me, she asked me, how are you doing? Doing well, but I was doing badly, so I didn't really want to talk about it. So I just said, oh, I'm fine. And she just said, no, you're not. It's obvious that you're not. What's going on? And again, at that moment, you can say, well, I'm not doing well, and now I have this person who's going to argue with me about whether I'm doing well. You might think that she was, kind of a jerk. But actually, again, at that moment, I felt really seen. So someone who was disagreeing with me was giving me than if she had just agreed and said, oh, okay, good. So it's confusing. That to be a good friend, we have to be supportive. We have to be sure that the person we're a friend to feels safe and supported. We also have to be sure that we're willing to confront them and disagree with them. Even, or really especially, on the points that they hold most dear, that they consider to be most true. The areas where they're most attached to certain ways of looking at things. That is very hard. To balance these two is not easy. And so I'd like to finish with a conversation about how do we know which one we should do. And that way we can look at the value of meditation. One of the most helpful teachings, I think, in world history is, in the way that we tend to phrase it in the West, is do unto others as you would have them do unto you. This is one of the most helpful teachings that we have, and it has deep significance, and there's a version of it in Buddhism as well. There's a version of this teaching in all the major cultures that I know of. Of course, there are thousands of cultures that I don't know of. So the major cultures that I've studied, I've been able to find a version of this. We can appreciate it and we can make use of it. But I'd suggest that in this particular case, it does not apply. I suggest that in this particular case, how do you know if you should support someone or not, or disagree with them? How should you know if affirming someone or contradicting someone is more helpful to them? It's confusing. And I think it's overly simplistic to make use of what we call the golden rule. Because sometimes when we contradict someone, it isn't immediate that they feel like we're helping them. In fact, sometimes they never feel like we're helping them. Does that mean it's the wrong thing to do? On the other side, sometimes when we affirm what someone is thinking or saying or doing, they immediately like that. And they may always like that. That doesn't necessarily mean that we're helping them or that that was the right thing to do. So when we think, well, what would I like? We think, well, I would like comfort, so I should make them comfortable. That isn't necessarily true. The other side, maybe we say, well, I appreciate it when people ask me to go beyond the way I see things. Well, that doesn't necessarily apply to someone else at this moment. And so actually, in order to be friends with someone, I would say that the most important thing is to set aside our way of looking at things. To set aside our personal preferences. To set aside our perspectives. Not to treat them the way we would like to be treated. That might be a good start. But an even more advanced place to be is treat them the way they would like to be treated right now at the deepest level. And how do you know that? Well, honestly, people are telling us that. We're actually all quite transparent in this way. The only reason we have trouble seeing what people are asking for, is that we're not seeing them at all. We're just seeing ourselves. We're seeing the person we think they are, which is really just an idea in our own head that we're stuck on. We're not seeing the person in front of us, we're seeing the person we assume they are. The person we see because we're not looking. We have certain assumptions about what a certain person is like. Maybe a person, and so we immediately assume certain things about that person. A male person. Deep down inside, we believe that. Oh, I'm talking to a female. This is a female person. That's what I'm talking to. I'm talking to a female. I'm talking to a young person, to an old person, a white person, a black person. We create the categories. We then associate those categories with certain characteristics, and we talk to that person, the person who we've just invented in our own minds, who is not standing in front of us. That person not only isn't standing in front of us, that person doesn't exist anywhere in the world. It's a completely imaginary person who we're talking to. And that person has to go in order for us to talk to the person in front of us. And so that's why I say that rather than thinking, treat them the way we would like to be treated, my perspective on things, whether it's how I think they would like to be treated because they have the various characteristics that I associate with the person I'm imagining, that all of our own views have to go so that we can see the actual person who's in front of us, who we have never seen before. This is not the person who was in front of us yesterday. We've never met this person before. The idea that we have in our mind is not accurate. And to be accurate in our connection with someone depends first and foremost, it's not all that's needed by any means, but first and foremost on discarding the imaginary person who doesn't exist anywhere but in our minds. And that's very hard. And a community like this is a place for us to notice how hard it is. Because even here, when we pretty much know each other relatively well, we still see the person who we assume they are. And talk to that person, not carefully attempting to develop a relationship with the person who's in front of us. But still we think, okay, you have said these things, so you probably have these views, and since you have those views, then you probably do these things. So I'll talk to you as if you're that person. All of that happens so quickly that we often don't notice that we're doing it. But to have a relationship with, to try to be supportive of or contradict an imaginary person, not only achieves nothing, but actually creates distrust. Either way we go. On the other side, if we can actually be with the person in front of us, if we can learn how to discard our views in order to accelerate the process of getting to the point of being as close as I have been to the people I mentioned in this talk, then once we've made a deeper connection, then everything we do develops trust. Everything we do develops trust. If you affirm someone, trust is cultivated. If you contradict someone, trust is cultivated. In just the ways that I described in the examples I gave earlier. So the beginning, the starting point is intentionally cutting off and discarding the assumptions that we're making about the people who we're attempting to befriend. Somehow, whatever it takes, find a way to cut that off and then actually see the person in front of us. Listen to the person who we're befriending. Really hear them. Don't talk to an imaginary person who looks like them, but actually connect with that person. This is very hard for us. And I suggest that at this time in our history, it's the hardest of all. I want this to feel very clear that in this very community, we have this issue of people looking at someone and seeing an imaginary person and then treating them in that way, or treating them in the way we wish that they would treat us. Rather than being willing to make a real connection. But it's in that real connection that shifts happen. It's when we're truly seen and truly loved in the same moment that we make shifts. That shifts occur in our perception and our behavior. If we're loved but not seen, it doesn't impact us. If we're seen but not loved, it doesn't impact us. Both of these are difficult. But in the talk right now, we're talking about attempting to befriend someone. That means that there's a sense of love. I'm trying to connect with you in a loving way. The challenge, of course, is how do I see you rather than the person I think you are? How to do it? Each of us has that responsibility. Each of us has that responsibility. No one can do that for us. No one can let go of our views on people for us. So each of us comes here in order to achieve that, in order to get to the point when we can be a good friend. And good friendship is the ability to see someone as they really are, same moment for who they are. And that's why this practice, the meditation practice, is so important, because we sit here and we just make a practice moment by moment of dropping what we think is happening, dropping our perspective on things, dropping the story that we're telling about the situation and about ourselves. And as we drop that story about the situation and about ourselves, we are more and more able to come out of meditation and meet a person for who they are right now, accurately, truly, no longer associating with associations. But able to develop true friendship. This is a skill, of course, and so we practice it, and now we have some time to practice. Find a balanced posture. In order to establish yourself right here. The sense of being balanced gives us a physical experience of being present, not veering off this way or that way, not leaning forward, not leaning back. As always, if you can, if it's physically appropriate for you, then attempt to not lean against the back of the chair, because that has significant impacts on our state of mind. But balance yourself in order to constantly, physically remember the importance of being stable. Again, if you need the chair to stabilize you, that's fine, but if possible, stabilize yourself. And pay attention to your physical body sensations. Pay attention to the physical sensations that you're feeling in your body right now. and attempt, to whatever degree is possible, to distinguish between the body sensation that you're experiencing right now and a story about the body sensation, associations with the body sensation, thoughts regarding the body sensation. This is a continuing practice. It's very common that a person will do this practice for years and then one day notice, this is how you distinguish. This is the difference between a body sensation and a thought about a body sensation. Oh, I see. So naturally it takes practice. And that's why we're doing this, so that we can practice. 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 Pay attention to this body sensation, setting aside ideas about this sensation. Always feel free to adjust your posture. Be sure that you're still balanced, still relaxed, still upright. And then return to the technique, paying attention to body sensations, while setting aside our views on body sensations. Very good. And for minute or two, feel free to stand up and stretch a bit before we move into the next aspect of this practice. Whenever you'd like, please feel free to sit down, or you can continue to practice while standing. Now bring your attention to what you hear, the sounds around you. And listen to them as they occur. Distinguishing them from whatever thoughts or views we may have about them. Simply pay attention to the sounds in this moment, setting aside any thoughts, opinions, views, perspectives, assumptions, stories we may have about them. Always feel free to adjust your posture to find a balanced position. And continue to use that to remind yourself to stay with this sound right now, without wandering into this thought about it or that thought about it, or wandering in a different direction altogether, but staying with this sound, hearing it just as it is, being willing to hear it as it is. Not listening to the sound that we think it is. listening to the story about the sound, but listening to the sound right now. Whether that's my voice, sound of the wind, birds, traffic, the people in the room, whatever it is. Each next sound, just as it arises, fresh and new, unexpected and unexplained. This can never get boring because it's always a surprise. You can listen to the sound of a fan for hours. It's fascinating the whole time because it's new each next moment if we don't expect it. This is why Jesus of Nazareth said, "The kingdom of heaven comes when you don't expect it." Just don't expect this next moment, and it is heaven. If you expect it, then it's merely the world. There's a shift in our awareness. Make that shift from seeing what we think we'll see to seeing what is unexpected. In this particular part of the exercise, we're working with hearing. So for now, apply that to hearing. And once again, if you'd like, feel free to stand and move. Connect with your body for 1 or 2 minutes.
Very good, and feel free to sit down again if you'd like, or continue to practice while standing. In any case, find a balanced, upright, relaxed posture. And now, if you'd like, practice with your eyes open. Those of you who have been practicing with your eyes closed up until now may wish to open your eyes, and you may not wish to do so. If you'd prefer to keep your eyes closed, then attend to both what you hear and what you feel. Pay attention to physical sensations and also to sounds in your environment. But if you'd like to practice with your eyes open, then continue the exercise seeing whatever you see in front of you, setting aside thoughts or opinions you may have about it.
Continue to attend to what you see in this moment. If your eyes are open, or if your eyes are closed, then attend to what you're hearing or feeling in this moment. In any case, setting aside opinions, views, stories, and assumptions about this is basically the practice of cutting through your own mind, a filter of your own mind. Each moment is your chance to break through that net of delusion and see what is present as it is. So this is a time for comments, questions, reports, discussion. Have a little under half an hour for you to make use of the time however you'd like.
I mean, I find when meditating with my eyes open, that the attachment to I guess my ego is that much more pronounced, and it's been difficult along in comparison to my other senses to let it go more and to drop narrative, and yeah, it's I don't exactly know what to do. Or of can you offer any type of suggestion of maybe not a difference in relationship to it, but what has helped you in your journey with the seeing without those types of biases?
Which types of biases specifically? You're referring to the biases from having your eyes open?
Yes.
This is as you may know, it seems that you have a certain amount of experience with the practice. As you may know, there has been a long, millennia-old disagreement about whether we should meditate with our eyes open or closed. Different schools of different traditions have been arguing about this for a long time. And in terms of the Buddhist tradition, which is the one I'm most familiar with, it's interesting that nowhere in the thousands of pages of texts, spiritual texts, you read through them, and some of you may know how extensive the Buddhist canon is. I don't know how many thousands of pages it is, but probably tens of thousands of pages of text. Nowhere does the Buddha just go out and tell us whether we should sit with our eyes open or closed. You'd think that we could have avoided thousands of years of bickering. But the fact that it isn't even mentioned is because it means that, and to me anyway, it means that there isn't a right answer. It isn't that this is the right way. Like so many aspects of the practice, there are strengths and weaknesses in both directions, and so it doesn't make sense to make a hard and fast rule that people are supposed to follow. You bring up an aspect of or one part of the argument that we should sit with our eyes closed, that we should practice with our eyes closed, and that for most of us it's easier to concentrate that way. If we consider for the human being, our species, the senses, in terms of what we're engaged with, okay? Not in terms of experience, but in terms of what we're consciously engaged with, the majority of that is visual, perhaps 80 or 90%. And so it's not surprising that, now I should say that doesn't mean that actually we suffer the most when we lose that particular sense. There are other senses which are considerably more problematic, actually. For example, certain aspects of what we call the sense of touch or a feeling, which is actually a sense that's comprised of several senses. But in any case, consciously, in terms of the conscious engagement, for most of us, the visual is dominant. So it's not surprising that when we have our eyes open and that visual input is coming, we would be activated. We would be compelled. Now it's interesting, you can just as well make the argument that that's, which is what was done in the tradition that I trained in, primarily the Zen tradition. That then is the reason given to sit with your eyes open. That's precisely why you would sit with your eyes open. Since you want to function in the world, you want to be of service, and under those circumstances, you're going to have your eyes open. So you want to work through the attachment to the stories that come associated with the visual sense. Otherwise, you'll sit, you'll reach a clear place, open your eyes to start serving society, and you'll be back in your personal attachments. So from that perspective, they suggest that it's much harder to reach true clarity if you're sitting with your eyes closed. It's interesting, precisely the same piece of evidence is used by different schools to come to contrary conclusions. And that's fine. We just have to be aware it's probably all true, right? It's unlikely that experts in their field would be just wrong. It's just that different approaches are being offered. And the part of the approach that they're referring to that a certain school is very good at is the part which we can learn from. That doesn't mean that every other argument is to be discarded. In terms of my practice, the only thing I found helpful, to answer your question, to overcome the associations that come through visual engagement, is practice, is to sit with my eyes open and to continually practice that way. I don't have any particular trick, but I do have what's called a framing. Do you know what that means? To frame something?
Orientation.
An orientation on it, exactly. There's a way of framing the issue or orienting ourselves to the issue that I think is helpful. It's just a different attitude. Does that make sense? It's not a different technique, but sometimes we take a different attitude. So the attitude is that I first sit with my eyes closed. But I sit with my eyes, this is if I want to succeed with my eyes open. Do you understand? So that's where we're trying to go, which I think was your question. So assuming that that's where we want to go, step one is sit with my eyes closed and attend specifically and carefully to the visual experiences that I continue to have with my eyes closed, which is to say mental images continue to arise. And I, in particular, concentrate on those arising. And I notice that there are a lot, generally many, many more than we notice. They're there, they're having their impact, but we don't notice. For example, with your eyes closed, attending to body sensations and feeling something in your knee, and without even noticing it, an image with detail on your knee. That image, it may start noticing how many images arise of your body. In fact, body images are arising in our minds almost constantly. And we don't notice them, but they still have an impact on us. We start to notice them intentionally. And we notice details and characteristics that we may not have noticed before. But we notice other things. We notice that maybe a verbal thought arises about someone. We may not have noticed it, but in fact, an image of their face arises. We see them, or we see the event that we're talking about. So we start to notice how many images arise in our minds. Then, with that knowledge, we can open our eyes and notice that there's a real benefit to opening our eyes, because that, while it certainly engages us in terms of the external world, it helps to break up the internal images. So it actually helps us to release our attachment to the internal visual experience by creating an engagement with the external visual experience. And so we can notice that an engagement with the external breaks up the engagement with the internal. Okay? We actually study that relationship. So we can close our eyes again, notice it again, open our eyes again, and notice that those images are suddenly much more vaporous. Okay? So now here's the fun part. The fun part is every time you open your eyes and notice that external breaks up internal, you're experiencing the breakup of internal visual impressions and attachment to them, association with them, fixation on them. Okay? That means that you're directly experiencing the breakup of fixation on internal visual experience. Okay? But internal visual experience is still visual experience. Right?
Yes.
So you're experiencing the breakup of fixation on visual experience. You can then apply that to external visual experience. Yes, that's exactly the right reaction. Oh. So you have experienced, you know what it's like to break up fixation on internal visual experience, which means you know how to, which means you've experienced the breakup of attachment to visual experience. Experience the breakup of attachment to external visual experience, and then you're free of both forms of visual experience, and you're on your way, whether your eyes are open or closed. And that's sort of an orientation to it. You know, you just orient yourself knowing that the external breaks up the internal, but that's still a breakup of attachment to visual experience. And so I'll use engagement with the external to break up engagement with the external visual experience. Sort of a way of thinking about it, a way of understanding its value. Does that make sense?
Mostly.
Yeah.
I mean, yes, when it comes down to the sinking into the field of visual experience and allowing the falling towards that, the reactionary or the impressions of the future or imagination gradually dissolves, and that dissolving, that feeling of emptying, that can, I guess, not passively or actively be there, but a complementary opposite to the sinking or a falling into visual experience, to sort of counterweight of being in that space. When it comes down to then of in relationship to the two ways that I have to look towards the idea of falling or of visual experience. On one hand, it does feel like it's detaching from the visual experience. On the other hand, which then, all right, well, in that way it gets confusing for me, because this idea of, okay, if I sink into this, will I no longer be able to cultivate inner vision? Will I have become too associated with my sight above else? And that is a gray area that I don't very much understand yet.
Let me just be sure I understand what you're saying. So the first thing I hear you saying is that, slightly different from the way I was talking about it, but the way that we were practicing it today, but different from what I was just saying, but in accordance with what we're practicing today, you're interested in sinking deep into visual experience, totally dropping into it.
What happens for me is during visual experience, there comes different types of orientations competing with each other. Of how do I, let alone interacting with other people, all those indecisions of what does it mean to be natural and what does it mean to be intentional in how I wish to embody my presentation. And in those two types of motivations, there are many different tensions that can exist between them that keep me from creating a type of restful stability. Because when I'm inside myself, there isn't so much the issue of what does it mean to acknowledge and be acknowledged with other. And so in that kind of the complexities of social dynamics, it's it gets really messy and less of naughty.
Yeah. Let's, for now, just to try to keep it narrow enough to work through this in a reasonable period of time, just for practical purposes, narrow this down to not social engagements, but just attention to the visual experience externally in this moment. Now, when you're attending to that, I think you're saying you're working on sinking into that. That's your way of attending to external visual experience, sinking into it. Is that correct?
Yes.
When you start to sink into it, you find that you enter some kind of samadhi. Is that what I'm hearing?
It as of yes, with the bumps in the road about whether or not I'm going in a good direction.
And then the question is, okay, I'm entering samadhi regarding visual experience. See out.
What is samadhi?
Oh yeah, good question. Samadhi is a word that we need to import into the English language because there's no way to talk about it in the English language. Sometimes it's translated as concentration, but it isn't really the thing that any American would think of when you said concentration. It includes concentration, but usually when people think of concentration, there's intent, effortful focus, which isn't part of samadhi. Samadhi is, well, how about this? You may have noticed, you may not have noticed, I'll just tell you, that in the East, mysticism as a form of religion versus fundamentalism, mysticism meaning experiential spirituality versus doctrinal spirituality, okay? Mysticism, experiential spirituality, has been far more successfully maintained, cultivated in the East than the West. You may have noticed that. It's, as far as I can tell, that's inarguable, that's incontrovertibly true. Maybe someone disagrees. There's certainly mysticism in the West, and not at the same level. It's a natural human capacity. It's everywhere. But do you have a system that cultivates it or impedes it? The primary reason that it's been more successfully maintained in the East is that they know that they have a concept, samadhi. So for us, the intellectual approach to spirituality is more or less all we have. We don't have samadhi. We don't have samadhi as a concept. Of course, people experience it, but it's very different when you can talk about it. And when someone experiences it, you can confirm, yes, that is samadhi, or no, that's not yet samadhi. Continue on. So it's a kind of losing of yourself. It's a kind of concentration. It's a kind of deep experience. Even in the East, of course, the word samadhi is defined in different ways in different traditions. There are different degrees of samadhi, very different degrees. Say that something like we're discussing here is a kind of samadhi, even though it isn't relative to other states. Other people would say that samadhi is extremely deep and is almost, maybe in some extreme cases, would say that it actually is liberation or enlightenment. That's another word for that. And in a few traditions. Actually, a lot of the arguments that happen about samadhi from people, Westerners who study Eastern traditions, is that they get the definition in their tradition and from another tradition and they argue about nothing because they're just the word. But across them all, there's a sense of concentration and losing yourself and going beyond the typical patterns of self-identification, seeing things much more accurately than most of us do, cutting through self-centeredness and delusion. That is a kind of experience that can be cultivated and deepened and identified. So that's the best I can do, but it's a word that, like so many words in Sanskrit, you more or less have to learn it through usage, because it isn't merely that the word doesn't exist in English, it's that the concept doesn't exist in our culture. So it isn't just a matter of saying enough words that you can paste the concept together from other concepts. The concept actually isn't present. So we really need to, I think the best thing is to import the word, which is typically what is done in a language when another language is talking about a concept. I think it's time that we do that. It's one of 5 words that I think we should import from.
Seems that's what you're doing.
I'm trying to, yeah, obviously.
Thank you.
Yeah.
That was a great explanation.
So it's a kind of samadhi that you're experiencing, and let's talk about that in particular, okay? Because in samadhi, and that we enter an absorbed state of a certain kind of absorption, which is so compelling to our attention. It draws in so much of our attention that all of the other formulations, ways that we construct, start to fall apart, start to deconstruct. For example, the internal creativity starts to decompose. It stops arising. Characteristic of certain kinds of samadhi, which is in most kinds, which is a very positive quality, because in setting aside all of the internal mental constructions, we are by definition setting aside all of the internal mental constructions that are delusional. And that's what we want. It turns out later to be, happily, incredibly easy to re-engage that creativity. And then we can re-engage it in a much more pure form that isn't woven together with all of our personal delusion. Because we set aside that delusion and discovered that we don't need it. But we may find that a situation requires a kind of creativity that we can then engage with incredibly little effort. So I think it's important to have faith in that, to know that it's okay to set aside the internal blossoming of creativity for time and drop deep into the direct experience as it is, and in this case, for it to be visual is fine. Does that help with that particular case?
Yes.
Okay, great. Is it okay if we set aside the rest for now?
Of course.
And then, of course, you bring up many. The reason I asked is that in the time you're talking, I think you brought up 5 or 6 different significant issues, but maybe so thank you. Yeah.
I have a question about the friendship issue.
Yeah.
I have a terrible track record with what you were talking about. Having lost several friends. And the one area where I'm really comfortable bringing up what I think is the wrong direction, of course, is with my husband. I do that regularly, and he never listens to me. And sometimes I'm right and sometimes I'm wrong, but it doesn't matter because, so I've come to the conclusion that people don't want to know.
Mm-hmm.
And so I don't say anything anymore.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. No. looking for a response or?
Is there a question in there?
Yeah, sounded like a pretty clear statement.
Well, no,
I hear you.
yeah, I am looking for a response.
What is it?
Maybe I don't want to know.
Good, that was brilliant. I think we're finished with that. I think you just hit the nail on the head with that one.
Yeah.
So, if you want to know, you may find that you see others differently. Yeah, unless there's anything else you want to talk about there.
No, I mean, I do have an insight
Mm-hmm.
in what you said in terms of, well, what I've done unskillfully. I've seen imaginary people instead of the actual person. So that's the insight that I take away.
Mm-hmm. Does the real person want to know?
I still have my serious doubts about that. I think everybody likes to plow their own path.
Mm-hmm.
For some strange reason. And make their own mistakes again and again and again.
Yeah, I think the word everybody is a big word
Yeah.
there. I think almost everybody in our culture wants that, but it's a cultural construction.
Yeah.
We're individualistic, you know. Maybe you've heard me talk about this before, but one of my favorite studies of all time, I lived in Japan for quite a while, is it had, I think, 2-year-olds. Those of you who heard me tell this story dozens of times, is it 2? Sometimes I change it. Is it 2-year-olds, 3-year-olds? Maybe it's 2-year-olds? Doesn't matter so much. 2-year-olds say, it took a group of American 2-year-olds. What's the earliest age when you can really talk? You can talk when you're 2.
It's just a
Obi is how old? 2.5? Yeah, so probably 2-year-olds. Because he can understand, they want it as early as possible that they could understand. So, yeah, probably 2, 2.5. They brought them into a room, and there were 2 piles of toys that were chosen randomly. And they told them, your mother picked out these toys for you because she thought you'd like them. These are just the rest of the toys. Okay? And then they just paid attention, which pile of toys did the 2.5-year-old play with? And the group of American toddlers immediately went to the toys that the mother hadn't chosen for them. I know better. What does my mother know? 2.5. Japanese kids, they did the same thing. Japanese kids went to the pile that their mothers had chosen for them. An extraordinary difference in the percentage of kids who went one way or the other. So I'd say that it's, is cultural, and I'd say that there's something we can do about it. So I'm going to just jump in and hope that I get this right, even though I didn't hear a question so much. But I'm gonna do my best. So the way I put it is, people, and I'd say that this is universal, people love to give advice. We love it. We love to be someone who people listen to. For that reason, it's quite rational for us to suspect people who are giving us advice, because it's possible that they just want to give advice. And we're the convenient recipient of their adviceness. Advice. So, in my experience, I do something kind of unusual. Running a monastery and all the other stuff that I do. And I have to say, and some of you have already heard this, I have to say that a lot of people give me advice. And I'm going to be really blunt here. The vast majority of it is bad. It's really surprisingly bad. And the reason it's so surprising to me how bad it is, it's way off. It has nothing to do with me. It's nothing to do with the organization. It has to do with their own personal history, I'm happy to talk to you about your own personal history, but don't expect me to make decisions that impact people's lives according to your personal history, which people do expect me to do and are mad then if I don't, because they gave me advice, which I should have followed by now. The reason it's so surprising to me is that the first person to whom I went for advice was a Zen master who gave me absolutely impeccable advice for many years. Just excellent advice, constantly. But the percentage of the advice he gave that was excellent, not just good, but excellent, probably 90–95% of the advice he gave me was in the excellent category. And then all but 1 or 2% was in the good category. Occasionally, he gave poor advice, but the problem with it is that so often I thought it was poor advice, and therefore I didn't take it. And then I took it and discovered it was excellent advice. It's really, it's just because he kept on repeating it ad nauseum for years, and I finally was willing to do it just to get him to shut up. And then I turned out, oh, sorry, that was really good advice. My mistake. I didn't think it was going to work. Here and got so much bad advice, and I took it because I assumed that people give good advice. 95% of the advice I got in my life was excellent. And then people started giving me all this advice. I took it, wrecked things, just destroyed things. What's the difference? What happened? And the reason is actually, to me, quite obvious, which is why I just gave a whole talk on it. That is that he is a person who had trained himself for years to set aside his perspective and bring together my perspective and his experience. His expertise that had been gained through many years of experience together with my perspective and needs. Because he was willing to set aside his perspective and needs. He knows how to do that. He can completely drop his way of seeing things, his preferences, his desires, and serve a person. Yes? And then all that's left is his vast store of experience, which we might call expertise, which is then presented to me in the way that I can receive it, because he's able to take my perspective, because he has set aside his perspective, is why he can take my perspective. And I know I've only said that several times today. Sorry, I'll say it hopefully hundreds of more times, but it's really hard to hear it. But the reason he can take my perspective is that he set aside his perspective. That's the reason. Should I repeat it? It wasn't clear. We think we can take someone else's perspective without setting aside our own. We deeply believe that. Oh, I know what you mean. Yes, but you need to know what I mean. No, set aside what you mean. Hear them, be with them, and then your expertise is what remains. Okay? So that's where good advice comes from. I think in our culture, we don't practice this. We don't have a way of practicing this. And so our advice is consistently bad. So people get trained to not take other people's advice. So I wonder if it's really that we don't want to know versus that we've learned to be so suspicious that our immediate reaction to advice is go away. Right? How do we make the difference? Simple. We are like him. We are one of the people who gives 95% excellent advice. How? By learning to drop our own perspective and really see things from someone else's perspective. Really. And then provide our expertise from that perspective. It doesn't mean, let's be clear, it doesn't mean that they'll like it. I mean, I almost always thought his advice was bad. Almost, so 95% of it was excellent, but 95% of the time I thought it was bad when he first gave it. Because if I didn't, he wouldn't need to give it to me. I would have thought it up myself. You understand? You understand? The advice I thought was good, I already tried that. He's not going to give me that advice. He's not going to tell me what I already think is right. He's going to tell me what I think is wrong, but which is right. That's what good advice is. So almost always I thought it was a bad idea. And so people may not like it, but the reason that they don't like it, I don't think is that they don't want it. It's that it's so hard for us on the one hand to believe that a person is really setting aside their own perspective for our benefit, because it in fact happens so rarely. And the other side, we're already attached to our way of looking at things, which is the source of our problem, and to drop that attachment can be frightening. But that isn't because we don't want to grow. We deeply do want to grow. We just don't believe either that we can or that someone else is actually serving us. But each of us knows what we can do about that. On the one hand, we can drop our own perspective so that we can help others. On the other hand, we can drop our own perspective so that we can walk it in a direction.
That makes a lot of sense. So that is where my training is, to drop my own perspective.
For all of us. It's just one part of the training, but I think it's something we can all work on. So now sorry that we went over time. That seemed important. I hope worth going several minutes over. Announcements about ways we can be of service this week. Yeah.
So, for the new people here, we keep track of all the events that people say this evening. So you can find a link to that in the emails we send out every week on the bottom. And hopefully everyone who says an event today will add their event to the page, all the details people need to know to be able to go to the event. So I have a few to start us off. This Monday, there's a 350 Vermont Road meeting. On Tuesday, there's a showing up for racial justice meeting at the UU Church. On Friday, there's a screening at Main Street Landing Filmhouse. It's called Waking the Sleeping Giant, and it's about the current political movement and the rise and the progressive movement happening right now. And we'll get you some more info on this, but on Saturday, there is a day-long retreat with Shinzen Young happening property in Lowell. We'd love for as many people as possible to come up. It's going to be a great event, and if it would make it easier for you, you could spend the night making more immersive experience. But we'll get you all the info on that before you leave this evening.
Thank you. How would somebody get those emails if they're not on them?
Yes. So we have a sign-up sheet for emails on the table outside. Add your name, and we'll get you on the email list, and you'll get the link to all these events as well.
Very good. Nice. Look forward to seeing you perhaps this weekend up in Lowell, and certainly this coming weekend right here on Sunday.
We'll be doing some chanting in 15 minutes at 7:20.
Sure.
It's very
No, I wasn't sure because you drink a lot of water.
Oh, yeah. I just didn't know.